Good morning, good afternoon. First things first, I would encourage everybody to start eating because we are going to do the program, but please eat while we're speaking. My name is Heather Culp. I am proud to represent Chevron as the USGLC board member on behalf of our Vice President for Corporate Affairs, Al Williams, our Head of Investor Relations, Roderick Green, and our Chief Inclusion and Diversity Officer, Josetta Jones. It's really an honor to be with all of you here today. As a company that's been committed to the economic development and energy security of both this country and countries around the world, supporting USGLC has just totally made sense to us for years, and we continue to honor this partnership. We've got a very special gathering for you today. As the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation hosts its annual legislative conference, and isn't it nice to be back in person? We have the distinct honor to celebrate African American leadership in foreign policy here with two exemplary leaders who are making history as the first African American members of Congress to hold the top posts on the committees responsible for policy and funding to advance our role in the world and our civilian development and diplomacy tools. And their leadership, let's be frank, could not come at a more crucial time. I don't need to list all the multiple crises that we heard about last week at UNGA that you all are dealing with on a daily basis. We need this kind of leadership in America more than ever before. Leadership matters, and it's exciting to see people like you who recognize this, seated around a table, engaged on these very issues. Later in the program, we're going to be joined in conversation by Travis Atkins at the U.S. African Development Foundation, a wonderful organization that Chevron's actually honored to have partnered with in some of our work in Nigeria. Eno Abong of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and Rita Jo Lewis of the Export-Import Bank, who also we were talking with, has partnered with Chevron in a former life with some of our work in Kazakhstan. We're going to be celebrating the much-needed progress towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and access initiatives in our foreign policy agencies, as well as recognize areas for future growth and improvement. We're just so honored to be part of this celebration today. Enjoy your lunch, enjoy the conversation, enjoy being here in person. And I want to now welcome the USGLC co-chair, someone I'm really honored to be able to say is my friend, former mayor of Columbia, South Carolina, a man who really exemplifies that local is international and international is local, Mayor Steve Benjamin, to serve as our MC.
Well, thank you so much for reading my intro the way I wrote it. I appreciate that. Good morning to all of you. My staff will tease me. I'm not going to pretend I can actually read what's on this page without having these on, so I'm going to look a little bit academic today. Welcome to this very special gathering of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. It is so much fun to be back at CBC, y'all, and to have the amazing fellowshipping and networking that happens here as we advance the interests of all of America's citizens under the leadership of so many of our fantastic members of Congress. This is a special gathering, and we have the distinct honor, as stated, to recognize African American leadership in foreign policy and pay tribute to two exemplary leaders who are making history as the very first African American members of Congress to hold a top post on the committees responsible for policy and funding to advance America's role in the world and our civilian development diplomacy tools. Their leadership could not come at a more important time, as we know, as the world grapples with unprecedented global crises that impact the health, economic, and security interests of Americans here at home every single day. Leadership matters. And it's exciting when our country's vibrant diversity is reflected in leadership on the global stage, particularly at these challenging times. Today, we are here to celebrate the invaluable contributions of African Americans lifting up diplomacy and global development, making a difference for our great nation. I am thankful that we are joined by several members of Congress here with us today. We have Congressman Colin Allred. We have Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. We have Congressman David Price. And of course, we have our honoree, Congresswoman Barbara Lee and her grandson, Jonah. We will be joined, obviously, by Congressman Meeks. Have I missed any other members of Congress in the room? All right, I know we have a few more who will also be trickling in as they meet their other obligations. But may I please ask all the members of Congress and all the congressional staffers to please rise for a second for a round of applause. So as we adjust, we're going to have Mr. Meeks join us shortly. I want to go ahead and recognize the chairwoman who she's been a leading foreign policy voice in Congress for decades and has built a well-deserved reputation as one of the fiercest champions of America's global leadership. Her focus on international affairs dates to her earliest days in Congress. She served on the precursor to the House Foreign Affairs Committee for 10 years and served on the State Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee for 14 years. From empowering women and girls to preventing violence and conflict to promoting human rights to strengthening international partnerships to fighting global poverty and hunger, she has been at the forefront of legislative efforts to address the most complex global challenges of our time. It's her passion for global health that stands out, however, to all of us among her many accomplishments. Chairwoman Lee was one of the original architects working with President Bush to launch the transformative program to fight HIV/AIDS known as PEPFAR that has now saved over 21 million lives across the globe. That's applause, y'all. 21 million lives. And she has been a leader on these issues every day since, and of course in the global response to COVID-19 as well. Her election as chairwoman of the SFOP subcommittee is a culmination of this leadership and time spent traveling in the developing world to gain a firsthand understanding of these programs. In this role, she's fought to increase funding for the international affairs budget and address today's biggest global challenges, from climate change to the global pandemic to ensuring progress on sustainable development goals. As the first African-American to lead the subcommittee, she's also prioritized efforts to diversify our diplomatic and development workforce and address systemic racism and discrimination in our foreign policy. And I will tell you, that was one of the very first Zoom. It's amazing seeing everybody in 3D, by the way. I would say this, but one of our very first Zooms, hearing you speak so passionately about making sure our diplomatic corps looked like America is something that even deepen the deep well of respect that I already have for you, Madam Chair. For your leadership, your passion, your unwavering commitment to elevating America's development and diplomacy tools and advancing U.S. global leadership, the USGLC is honored to have the opportunity to recognize you today. Would you mind joining us at the podium? And I will tell you, this is legit heavy, okay? So we're gonna take a picture real quick. We'll stand this way. And obviously, we're going to ask the chairwoman to say a word, please.
Well, let me first thank you for the very warm introduction and for this beautiful award. And I mean, this is kind of what I do each and every day, and this is my life's work. So it really is humbling to receive this award. And I want to thank you and just say to my colleagues, Congressman Price, Chairman Price, and Lisa Blunt Rochester, and where's Colin? How wonderful it is to work with members of Congress who understand where we are in terms of America's global leadership, but also understands the necessity to build a constituency, a broader constituency here in America for what we do in foreign policy and foreign affairs. So I just want to thank you, and I just want to say to Chairman Price, as he retires, we're going to miss him so much, but I want you to know, as chair of SFOPS, this year we were able to put into the bill a $5 million mark for the David Price Legislative Parliamentarian Building Parliaments and Strengthening Parliaments throughout the world. So that's in honor of his tremendous leadership, and being chair of SFOPS, we were able to do that. So thank you again very much for this, and I look forward to our discussion, and I'll share a little bit more during our discussion about how I came to where I am overall.
Great. So we're going to chat over here. Why don't we go right over here? Here, please. Right here. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Liz Schrayer. I'm the president and CEO of the USGLC, and I love seeing so many wonderful friends, and most of all, having the pleasure to visit and talk with Chairwoman Lee, who is so deserving of this incredible opportunity, a special moment, as Steve said, for this community to say thank you. We saw each other last week, and I mentioned that how excited we all are to celebrate you and Chairman Meeks when he gets here. He's finishing up. I'm told he'll be in about 10 minutes. So we'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll honor him. But you can see you are surrounded by a lot of friends from the administration, NGOs, business leaders, faith leaders, who all came to say thank you. Of your decades of leadership on this issue. And Jonah, when you walked in, I said, I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and what a thrill it would be to have your grandchild here to see everybody say how awesome your grandma is. So I want to get to foreign policy, but here's my question, because we talked about this last week. You know, you deserve to be up here and to have us all thank you because of your passionate and determined commitment to make the world a better place. But what we talked about is this historic moment that we are seeing an African-American woman lead on the world stage. And I want to talk about what it means for you personally to represent America on that world stage. And also taking a play out of Jonah, what it means to you to be this blazing, to lead a blazing trail for the future generation of African Americans and other underrepresented populations in the foreign policy space who aspire to be sitting in this chair. Tell us what it means.
Liz. Well, first of all, I'm a member of Team Lee, and I would like my staff to stand because there would not be Barbara Lee and her work if it weren't for Team Lee. So thank you guys very much.
I said when they walk in, it takes a village, and
yeah, that is so true. And one thing I want to just first of all say is thank you all again for understanding the importance of equity and inclusion in this space. Secondly, just a little bit of history. Jonah's dad, my son, was born in London. I lived in England for 2 years. And coming from America as a minority, you all know the trauma and the issues as it relates to the Middle Passage and being enslaved ancestors. My grandfather was born in Galveston, Texas. Grandmother was enslaved. So all of the history of being a Black American came to the forefront when I was in England living. And I realized then, because I met so many people from Africa, so many people from the Caribbean who look like me. And all of a sudden, I started saying, well, wait a minute, this is not the world I know. And then I became very aware and conscious of the fact that a large percentage of the world looked like me. And that was a very empowering 2 years, because then I realized that I was part of the world community. I'm really not a minority, and I don't believe in minority status as an American. And so from that day forward, and I mean, I was like 19 years old, I said, I have got to figure out how to share this perspective and this connection to the Black community in America. And I've been doing that ever since, every chance I get. And it's so important. Right now, for example, Yes, and I love my chair, Gregory Meeks, because he and I, you know, you authorize, you appropriate, right? But we figure out how to do both at the same time. I was like, Greg, okay, let's see how to do this in my committee and how you do this in yours. And part of the beauty of that is we have been able to begin to bring more focus to underrepresented countries, countries that have been neglected. The continent of Africa, the Caribbean,
Yep.
Asia, everywhere in the world that we have left a void or never really were there. Now, and we see what's happening in terms of geopolitical politics with China and Russia. Well, there's a reason for that. And so Chairman Meeks and I, we try to begin to fill those gaps and close those, stand in the gap and begin to try to bring some parity and equity in our foreign policy and our funding priorities. And so as an African-American woman, this is just who I am. And it started, as I said early on, my dad was in the military 25 years. He was a lieutenant colonel. And part of his life was, I mean, he was with the 92nd Battalion in Italy. He was in Korea. He served in Japan. And so we always had a global perspective, but we didn't travel with him because my parents wanted us to be in El Paso going to Catholic school. To say at the same school, Sisters of Loretta, Peace and Justice Nuns, but you know, that was, whew, that was another trip, being the only black kid, 2 girls in an all-white Catholic school for 8 years. So you know what a minority I felt in the day like that. It's like, boy, what is this about? So that experience really brought me to where I am today. And now I just want to say what we're doing now in Congress, in addition to Gregory and myself, we have outside organizations we work with, such as the Congressional Black Caucus Institute, which we finally were able to get a NGO status at the United Nations. I've been the representative to the United Nations on the Democratic side for several years now. And so we established a permanent forum for people of African descent. This is the decade of people of African descent. And so we're taking this message to the world. Because believe you me, what affects one affects all. And when you look at the issues in the diaspora, for example, in the African diaspora, as it relates to poverty, as it relates to health care, as it relates to systemic colonization and racism, I mean, these issues, the SDG, which I'll talk about later, goals, applicable here in our country as well. So we're trying to make these connections and and in doing that, what I'm trying to do is develop a broader base of people of color in the United States to engage on the global stage with you all, especially because you get it in terms of the priorities, in terms of development and diplomacy. We're always going to have defense. That's a given. So we're going to have to strengthen the foreign assistance base in terms of people organizing in their communities to support what you all are doing and what we're doing.
If you didn't know why we're honoring her, now you know. That was amazing. And I want to pick up, and I want to actually ask you about your role as chairwoman on appropriations. A lot of us were at UNGA up in New York in the last couple of weeks, and you didn't have to turn around very far to hear the swirling crisis happening in the world. I mean, it was everything that you deal with every single day that you fight for. Global health, climate change, the food crisis, the list goes on. And one of the questions that I think we all have is how you're making sure that your colleagues, many that are here that are fighting right along your side, are prioritizing this small investment in development and diplomacy, how you're making the case and connecting the dots that you just talked about. What is the case you're making to make sure that they understand we have to make sure that we're funding and America is meeting the moment when it comes to America's interests, leadership in the world, because it matters to our interests, exactly what you just said. How do we make sure it stays a priority?
Well, I think that so many members of Congress, many members of Congress, I should say, believe in the whys in terms of U.S. global leadership and in terms of just being a human being on this planet. What affects one affects all. And we have humanitarian issues, we have trade issues, we have all of the economic issues, all of the USAID issues. You know, all of this comes together to make sure that the world is healthy and safe. So many colleagues believe in that. But some, it's not a priority. So I make the national security argument. And I think, and you all have been really brilliant in helping us do that. And I'll give you an example. Very recently, I took a delegation to Germany. We met with AFRICOM, General Langley. Then we went to Ghana and Senegal, and then to Italy, to the World Food Program. And what we learned with AFRICOM and then in Ghana and Senegal in terms of our national security issues is you talk about extremists, you talk about terrorists, you talk about the continent being in danger, severe danger from the terrorist groups moving down, northern Ghana now, northern Nigeria. And so that's a threat not only to the continent, but it's a threat to us. It's a threat to democracy. And so we have to make sure, and the general told us that, you know, we have the military. I mean, Betty McCollum, my sister, I love her dearly, and we're so close. She has a $740 billion budget, mine's $64 billion. So you understand what I'm saying here. So we need more in development and diplomacy, and the military commanders are saying that, saying, yes, we've got to address the drivers of terrorism, which are young people being given a job or being paid $500 in a car. And then, boom, that's the recruiting. And that's how these groups are, you know, expanding. And they're expanding, coming down, and we're not exactly, I would say, separate from that, because these are groups that weren't there before 9/11 and before Iraq. And they're coming down from Libya, and they're coming down where the continent has never had to deal with this before. So I make the arguments in that way around national security and the fact that the military believes that putting more resources into development and diplomacy saves the military from having to use weapons and bombs and go into war. And I think that's a compelling argument, and more members are beginning to understand that, given all of the threats that we're facing to democracy all around the world.
Well, thank goodness for your leadership in making that argument, and I know so many others. You know, one of the things I know about you is you travel probably more than anyone else. I'm not sure anyone else, but many, many other members. You've been literally all over the world to some of the most challenging places of the world. And I wonder if you can share maybe one of your stories that has motivated you when it gets tough being out there, being sometimes the lone voice, and you fought and fought and fought for the global health funding. We're still not there where we need to be. You probably traveled with some of the people in this room, I'm guessing. Tell us a story about when you see that gives you hope and motivates you to do the work that you're doing.
Well, one story that, let me remember his name, John, his last name, because I have to, what is his first name is John, but bottom line is it's John Roberts Ngole, okay? In 2012, I went to Uganda. I believe it was with CARE. And they wanted me to meet this man in a village. I said, okay, I'd love to meet him. Didn't know why. Come to find out, he had been infected with HIV, had tuberculosis, was very, very sick. And he was the very first individual who benefited from PEPFAR through the antiretroviral treatments. He's got 5 kids, he's a school teacher, he's healthy, and it was as a result of PEPFAR that he's alive. And you talk about millions of people around the world who I've met, but I remember John specifically because they wanted me to meet him, I wanted to meet him, and didn't know why, but that was really a remarkable story. And there's so many people around the world and I've been to Africa many times before PEPFAR, before the Global Fund, and just many of you have seen the caskets on the streets, people, teachers being buried, young people being buried, going into the village. I mean, it's been a devastating, traumatic experience to be in the middle of that. And so when I came back, actually, from the Durban conference, I'll never forget this. This is another story that made me feel like I could maybe make a difference. I attended the Durban HIV/AIDS conference, probably late 90s, probably early 2000s. And I could only go for 24 hours because we had votes. I got on a plane, flew to Durban. Mr. Mandela spoke, others spoke, and everyone had on yellow, many people had on yellow T-shirts saying, I have HIV, a sea of yellow. And I came back in 24 hours, and I have to just salute our great speaker, Nancy Pelosi, because Nancy then came to me and she said, you know, Barbara, they took out $42 million out of the foreign aid budget, right? She said, do you want to try to get it back in? I said, really? I said, yeah, and it was specifically around global health. So I did an amendment on the floor and won that $42 million amendment with bipartisan support. And so I said, if I could do this, and it had a lot of help because, you know, then it was all on TV. The media was really showing the films from and the videos and the footage from the AIDS conference. And so everyone wanted to know what I saw and how it was and what was going on in the world. And I mean, I went member, after 24 hours of flying member by member by member and talked about the amendment, why we had to do it, and we passed it. So then I said, oh, well, maybe I could do more in terms of funding, something that no one thought we could get it done, but the speaker thought that that was the moment, since I had just come back from Durban, to try to do that.
You know, Chairman Meeks is just coming in, and I just want to say, on behalf of all of us, we are so fortunate to have somebody who has the knowledge, the skills, but the passion and determination to make sure that this funding gets through each and every year at a level that meets the moment. And so, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the entire USGLC community, please join me in thanking Chairwoman Barbara Lee.
Thank you, guys. Do you want me to?
Isn't she fabulous? Jonna, you should be very proud. We'll bring her up again for a picture with the Chairman Meeks, but I'm going to bring Steve back on. And it's much nicer. We can have two individual conversations. You can just visit for a moment. He's just coming down the escalator. You know, we can't control hearings. And Congressman Allred is here.
Excellent. I see we have Congressman Colin Allred. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
That was awesome.
We introduced you earlier too, so you get two. Okay. All right. All right. So we're gonna get Mr. Meeks in the room.
You can just talk.
I can tell jokes. I have some jokes there. They're girl dad jokes. My girls don't laugh at them anymore, but I can make it happen. All right. Who's gonna have some time? We've been told to visit. Visit for a moment. Wait for the chairman. All right. Dante. All rise. I was joking, but okay. If you As he works his way through the crowd, everyone, it's my distinct honor to present an award to our chairman, Gregory Meeks. We all know that Congressman Meeks, his passion for foreign policy and dedication to America's global leadership role began decades ago. Now in his 13th term, Chairman Meeks has served on the House Foreign Affairs Committee since his first election to Congress in 1998. Over the past 24 years, he's developed a deep understanding of the importance of America's development and diplomacy tools when it comes to advancing U.S. interests and values. That understanding is rooted in his time spent traveling abroad, often to regions in countries across Africa and Latin America, places that had not been historically prioritized in traditional American foreign policy. Formerly the top Democrat in the European Subcommittee and a past co-chair of the European Union Caucus, Chairman Meeks has championed America's commitment to international alliances and partnerships, including NATO, a champion for U.S. global health programs. He's also the co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Malaria and Neglected Tropical Diseases Caucus. His election as chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee is a culmination of decades of leadership and commitment to America's role in the world. He's already making his mark in his first term. He has maintained a packed schedule, as we all know, substantive hearings on critical foreign policy issues of the day, and authored numerous bipartisan bills to address a broad array of global challenges, from China's growing global influence, food insecurity, human rights violations, Russia's malign influence, among others. As the very first African American to lead this committee, he has also worked to increase diversity and inclusion at our international affairs agencies, so our diplomatic corps looks like America and represents its interests abroad. On a very personal note, I don't tell people in Columbia, South Carolina, but every time we're around, he does. I was born and raised in Southeast Queens, in the heart of my man's district. And having known him the vast majority of my professional career, it is no surprise to me that he's become one of the most thoughtful and respected members of Congress. His dedication to making the world better, a safer place, will continue in the years ahead. So, Mr. Chairman, you know it's a personal privilege for me. I bug him regularly. He sends me pictures that he's found of me in 6th grade and 5th grade with a big nappy head and everything else. That's a whole other story. But it's a personal honor, and I know an honor for all of us who gathered here to recognize you today and present you this award on behalf of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Come on, Murray.
There we go. Can you hear me now? That was a commercial. I hear you just had a birthday, so happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
We'd all sing, but I'm not going to sing. Well, I just said to Chairwoman Lee, this is such a special moment for this community to say thank you. To say thank you to you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on representing America to the world and taking on it at this really important time. I want to talk about the world and how you work so hard to advance our interests in the world. But I want to ask you the same question I asked Chairwoman Lee. Here we are at CBC, important legislative conference, and this is a pretty historic moment to see you and Chairwoman Lee lead these two important committees on foreign policy. And I'd love to get your thoughts as you're surrounded by so many friends that came out to say thank you for what you do on behalf of America's interest in the world. And maybe you could start by just sharing your own thoughts about how it feels to you, not just to be friends with Steve Benjamin, but to represent America as an African American, to represent America on the world stage. What it feels to you to be blazing a trail for the future generation of not only African Americans, but also underrepresented populations in the foreign policy arena that would aspire to be part of the foreign policy community. So we'd welcome your thoughts.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for what you do. And my brother and friend, Steve Benjamin, I still call him my mayor, even, we just shipped him to Columbia for a while, but we knew he's the mayor of southeastern Queens as well as in Columbia.
I don't know if his constituents would like that.
Well, part of the word is also, so he can get me back because my family and friends are all from South Carolina. So there's a direct connection there. So if he had to go to any state, I'm glad it's South Carolina. We send our very best. And I just want to say, just to start off, I just want to say how important it is that the work that you do, but the work of my friend and colleague, Barbara Lee. She is just awesome. And
She said the same about you.
it surely makes my job easier, because as you talk about going around the world, and when they start talking about their needs and money and things of that nature, I could say that I've got a partner on the Appropriations Committee who's chair of the subcommittee that understands, and particularly understands the needs of countries that have been historically left out, not paid any attention to. And so she is truly a partner that has made my job as the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee easier. And I just love her to death, and what she does and how she does it. She is not only a colleague, but she is a deep and important friend of mine and my wife's. And I'm just so honored to be receiving an award alongside her, and just thank her so very much.
Beautiful. Thank you.
See so many friends, and my colleague Colin Allred over there, and I got to give, my first trip, and I'll stop this, is I see Secretary Glickman, who I traveled with. When I first came, he had a delegation that was going, a SEC delegation, and we were going to China. And Barbara, that's how I get in trouble all the time, because of you blame Secretary Glickman, because that's how I started voting for trade and other things after traveling with him. So. Absolutely, that was my first trip to Africa there. So it is just so important. and as a result, and I mentioned those things because as a result of those experiences and traveling and going to different places, that sometimes was hard for members to go. When I think of the trip with Secretary Glickman, it was only about 4 or 5 members that traveled to China. When I think about our trips, several trips with Barbara, there was not a lot of members, because some of the places that we were going to weren't the fancy places, or weren't the places that you go just, to have a good time. It was places that were somewhat rugged and historic, but never had the attention of the United States Congress. And so those travels was to let people know that the United States Congress understands who they are and what they need. In fact, the reason why I'm late here today is I was doing a full committee hearing on Haiti, because it needs attention from what's going on, and we've got to do something and make sure that the United States government helps change the policies that we have had for a long period of time to make a difference, and to empower those of you in the room, the diplomats, so that we can make sure that your voices are heard. And that's what, wherever I go, people are talking about soft power. Not just military power. And even you talk to the military, they ask for soft power, that it makes their job easier when we have diplomats and NGOs and USAID present doing the kinds of things on the ground that's tremendously important, and thinking of things in a different and creative way. What's also important is I look at the diversity in this room. What has been important to me as the chair, and one of the things that we've looked to do, was to make sure that in the foreign policy space that there is diversity, because what that does, it brings different ideas and thoughts to the table, so that we can make sure that all thoughts in various countries can get the benefit of what America is best. And America is best when we are diversified, which is why it is significant that we're here at the 51st CBCF dinner. My workshop tomorrow will be on just that, talking about how do we make the State Department more diverse, so that there's different folks that's with different viewpoints and different voices, and how can they raise up also in seniority or in the ranks, not just the lower ranks of the State Department, all the way up to the higher ranks. It is important. And lastly, economically, the way that we can do business, because a lot of times when you look at, for example, the continent of Africa, they're talking about how do we engage economically so that we can grow their economies and moving forward. And that's what I see the people in this room, that's what you do on a consistent basis. And that's why you're so important, because if we don't put diplomacy on the same level as we do with DOD, we're going to miss opportunities and lose respect from countries around the world. And I think that, you know, one of the things that former President Bill Clinton said to me upon his about to leave the presidency, I asked him what surprised him more leaving the presidency than he did when he first entered the presidency. And he thought about it for a second, because I was talking about in the foreign affairs sphere, and he said, the smallest of countries, if you treat them with respect and dignity and listen to them, will get more than threatening them with our military might. And that has always stayed with me, so that we can make sure that we're having dialogue and conversations with the smallest of countries in the island states. Another reason I'm a little late, we just had another meeting with the island states in the Pacific Ocean, who have not, presidents having a summit for the first time, whom a delegation I intend to lead at the end of October, because we're not present there. And thankful for all of you for what you do on a regular basis, because what you do in a shrinking world makes us all better for it. And so that's why this award is very meaningful and impactful for me.
This is just one of the many, many reasons why I think it's such a privilege for us to honor you today. I want to ask you, one of the many things, but one of the most important, I feel like one of the most important aspects to our work is not what we do in Washington, but what we do around the country. The USGLC, with the help of so many here, goes around the country and we host town hall meetings, in-district meetings with your colleagues, with their constituents, to talk about these very issues that you just raised. We've hosted over 100 already this year. We've also met with candidates. The biggest event we just had, Dan was actually with us, but you were in Wichita. I was in Minnetonka, Minnesota. We were in the heartland. And over 5,000 individuals stuck in for watch the whole program. 200,000 citizens watched at least part of the program, which meant that they were really tuned into this conversation we're having. Why leading globally matters locally, why stability in the world really matters to American stability, to our economic and our health and our security, exactly what you're talking about. And my question is, how do you communicate to your colleagues that maybe aren't on the House Foreign Affairs Committee about the priorities of why we need to invest, both from a policy point of view and an appropriations point of view, in what is relatively small investment, but we have to prioritize this? What do you say to them?
Well, number one, I will tell you, I was shocked when I first came into Congress to learn that a third of the members of Congress did not own a passport.
Yeah.
And that just tells you how, as a nation and a country, we have to do what you do. Speak to the people on the ground right here in the United States so that they understand and are able to move forward. So what I do, with a number of my colleagues, the first thing that I try to do is to get them to travel.
Great.
Because once you get them to travel, they get to see for themselves the significance and the importance of dealing diplomatically and talking about why our leadership in the world is so important. And so I have found that once I'm able to get those that have not traveled a lot, and you just try to think creatively what you can do to, tell them, which I still think, and I think it is good, bring your spouse in some of those cases. So that makes it a little easier. Do what you need to do to try to make sure that the travel is easier for them, but when they go, oftentimes when you get someone, when they come back, they do see things in a different perspective. And I think that is, not only that, is good for relationship building even within the House, as far as on a bipartisan basis, because many of these trips, most of the trips, are required to be bipartisan. Yep. So you get to talk to a colleague in a different way, and when you get back, then you can start talking about things you could collaborate on dealing with foreign policy, and have them also be able to develop relationships with individuals like yourselves, and get you to go, as you did in Minnesota, to talk to the local people on the ground. And visiting universities help, because I think that as you teach and have our young people involved, that's how we will ultimately begin to change things. So on the ground is really important, and getting that relationship between some of my colleagues and the diplomatic community, it makes a difference. And of course, as I said, travel. So that's
all right. So I'm going to end with your travel. I asked Chairwoman Lee the same question. You've already talked about traveling is where the connection, you get to understand it. So maybe leave with one story from your travels, from anywhere that you have gone. Maybe it's the China trip or your trip with Chairwoman Lee, of someone you met along the way, a program that you saw that motivates you to say, this is where America's at its best. You saw a program, you met an individual that really motivates you of why you are so proud to be the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and see America's doing good in the world.
Well, I'll give an example, and it does involve the trip with Secretary Glickman and my trip to China. Because on that trip, I had been told many things before. I was actually just elected in a special election, and some were trying to encourage me not to go. Secretary Glickman convinced me to go, but I then had the conversation that if I went, I not only wanted to go to the meetings and the dinners, et cetera, that I knew was formalized, that had been arranged. I had asked then to make sure that I was able to have an interpreter in a car, so that I could then go wherever I wanted to and talk to average, everyday people in China. Because I had been told various things. Some told me, when I went to China at that particular time, being an African American, a Chinese may not have seen an African American before, and they would be running from me and wouldn't want to talk, or fearful of their government and things of that nature. And I wanted to find out on the ground itself. And so when I was on one of those trips, I had the driver and the interpreter, because I saw a bunch of people at a bus stop. And I said, oh, these are ordinary people getting on a bus, getting ready to go about their life. I got out, and I started talking to somebody on the bus stop. And what was engaged with this ordinary human being, we got into a very good conversation. And he was telling me about his thoughts and what he wanted for himself and his family and their life, et cetera. And I found that in that dialogue and conversation, he wanted and his family wanted the very same things that I wanted. And I know that what my family wanted. And all he wanted was government to help, not to be a hindrance, someone to be able to talk to. And what he did was then take me. He missed work that day.
Oh, my.
He got off the bus line and said, I want to take you to where I live. And I want you to see how I live.
That's great.
And we ended up having a very close conversation, a very humbled conversation. He told me how important he thought that America was to China at that time, because of the standards that he thought that we had as far as our American corporations and businesses were, as opposed to the state government at that point, the standards, the values. And so that always also, that conversation, I think, led me to know that any time that I did travel and had conversation, that we got to always stand up for who we are and stand up for our values. And even when we think we have gone astray, we've got to tell them the truth, that we still got a lot to do in the United States of America, that we're not the perfect world, perfect country, and we've got to figure it out and work collectively together to make it a better world. And that conversation, I guess, on that trip really has lasted with me for all of my career here, and how really to try to conduct myself on behalf of the United States Congress.
How lucky are we that Chairman Greg Meeks is chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee? Let me do a quick orchestrating. Can I invite Chairwoman Barbara Lee up and Mayor Benjamin up for a quick photo while we're going to have a new panel come up. I really encourage you to all please stay because we're going to have a look at the interagency view of African American foreign policy making, and you're not going to want to miss these three fabulous folks. But let's get our honorees back up here for a photo now that we have both of them together. And let's have a big round of applause for our two honorees. Please. They are the heaviest awards, so be careful. Yes, Al, is Al up here? Great. Okay.
Thank you.
I'll get one with them and I'll come.
Nice.
Unless you're actually holding the mic to someone. What do you think is best? But I can.
Somebody told me about that. Okay. What's happening?
Thank you all. We want to continue with our program. If you'd have a seat. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it's now time to begin our second program. I'd like you to join me. My name is Lionel Johnson. I'm a member of the Board of Directors of the USGLC, and I'm honored to be with you this afternoon. We are going to be welcoming Travis Atkins, President and CEO of the U.S. African Development Foundation, Ino Ibong, Director of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, and Rita Jo Lewis, the President and Chair of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. They will join us for a fascinating discussion on the future of diversity and representation in diplomacy and development. Before joining the U.S. ADF, Mr. Atkins served as the Deputy Assistant Administrator for Africa of the U.S. Agency for International Development and is also a lecturer of African and Security Studies at the Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Director Ebong has been with USTDA for over 15 years, including as General Counsel and Chief Operating Officer, building on her time as Head of Strategic Partnerships at the Milken Center for Advancing the American Dream and a practicing attorney in Boston. And my friend Rita Jo Lewis has over 25 years of leadership experience in international affairs, legal and public policy, business and regulatory affairs, and subnational diplomacy. Before her appointment to EXIM, Chair Lewis served as the first ever Special Representative for Global Intergovernmental Affairs during the Obama-Biden administration, where she was the chief diplomat in charge of the international efforts to build support and strategic relationships between the federal government, state, and local leaders and their foreign counterparts. Moderating the conversation will be Jahan Johnson, Senior Vice President of Citi. Please join me in welcoming these leaders.
Thanks so much, Lionel. And thank you all for being here today. Super excited about this great panel we have. Chair Lewis, President Atkins, Director Ebong, I'm so glad to be here today with you all, and thank you all for making the time out of what I know are packed schedules, especially this week. Really looking forward to our conversation. So if I could, I thought I would just sort of set the scene a bit and give a little bit of background on why we have these dynamic leaders with us today. So following President Biden's executive order to put into action the U.S. government's plans for greater diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, XM, USTDA, and USADF were among more than 90 agencies that released equity action plans to address the systemic challenges within their own agencies, while also prioritizing economic growth and opportunities on the African continent. And so starting with USTDA, you guys have brought together African project sponsors and US companies for over 30 years, bringing innovative private sector solutions to international development challenges. And USTDA, I know, has a really dynamic program called Access Africa, which Citi is proud to be a member of. XM, you guys, $12.2 billion in transactions over the last 10 years in sub-Saharan Africa, starting back to the 1940s, and today doing business in 44 out of 49 countries. I think you actually might have Citi beat on the number of countries we do business with, but glad to hear it. And finally, but certainly not least, USADF, investing $117 million directly with African grassroots enterprises and social entrepreneurs during the last 5 years, reaching 7 million Africans, those in marginalized communities, and amazingly, for every 10,000 that USADF invests, 25 workers being hired. That was a fun fact that I didn't know, and it makes me really excited and proud that Citi has partnered with each one of your agencies throughout the continent. And so if we could just dig a little bit into the conversation itself, I think I'll start with you, Director Ibong. So I would love to hear a little bit more from you on USTDA's vision and engagement with the African diaspora. Can you tell us a little bit more about your personal and professional journey from Lagos to Washington and how that involves your leadership and vision at USTDA?
Thank you so much, Rohan, and thank you to USGLC and to our distinguished members of Congress and the leadership in Congress, which makes all the difference in facilitating our work in the executive branch. We so appreciate the focus and the attention. I think I also want to make the point that it is telling that you all have on the stage representatives of agencies who I'm not sure the names of which trip off the tongues of young people and of people in the broader foreign policy world. So I want to thank you for that, because diversity includes reflecting the diversity of how we as a country, we as a government, approach the world. And we do it in many different ways. And the fact of the three of us here from the African Development Foundation, from the Export-Import Bank of the United States, and the U.S. Trade and Development Agency, I think is a very important note upon which to start. I think it also is important to talk about the different types of diplomacy, because again, for young people, they might just be thinking of the Department of State, of USAID, of the Department of Defense. But in fact, diplomacy is science. There's science diplomacy, there's diplomacy of public health, there's commercial diplomacy. And I think if we really are going to make a difference in diversity, it is making sure that we bring the diversity of how we work to our young people and to the foreign policy community as a whole. I say this because I am part of and lead an amazing agency that focuses in a very specific area. We are working to promote high quality infrastructure, but in a way that brings US expertise, US technologies, US solutions to the challenges around the world. And that in turn engages working across our country. We're a foreign assistance agency with a mandate essentially to promote jobs and exports. That's unique, but that means that we have to engage at home as well. And so that notion of bringing foreign policy to American people every day and opening up the opportunities to a range of diversity, I think is something that the agency very much acknowledges and puts forward in our work. I think it is important to mention a little bit of my journey, as you put it, Jahan, from Lagos to Washington, but only in a very specific way. So yes, I was born in Nigeria. I had the great privilege to be born to, and privilege and luck, because I think luck is a part of all of this, to be born to parents whose focus was education. Actually, that's the thing in Nigeria. It's all about education. And so was lucky enough to be able to be sent overseas to learn. And then parlay that into ending up in the United States, again, for education. But I had never heard of USTDA. I happened upon USTDA because a mutual friend was a friend of the general counsel of the agency when I was getting to the end of being a large law firm lawyer. I was a law firm refugee, and I wanted to do international work because of my own, sorry to all the law firms out there. I loved it. It was amazing. But I knew that I wanted to do something meaningful, that I was mission focused, and it needed to be international. And so I happened upon USTDA, and it's been the most impactful experience professionally in my life. My point is, and to bring us to the discussion, is that it shouldn't be one of happenstance. This is something that, for those of our young people who don't have that connection, that experience, should be readily available too. And I think we have some amazing programs, and we'll get into this discussion a little bit, amazing programs, amazing opportunities, but I think what is missing is a thread that connects it all, that is measurable, that can really track young people through their career in the foreign policy world. And I think, and I'm hoping we can talk about some ways to do that, but I thank you again for the opportunity to be part of this discussion.
Well, thank you so much for that. I do definitely want to come back to how do you build through that whole thread, because certainly your story is one that I've heard a lot, mimics my own, but from Chicago. And so, I think that there's a lot that we can all dig into from our own respective backgrounds. I want to take a moment, though, and turn to Chair Lewis and talk a little bit about supply chains. I'm sure that's like top of mind for you, and to be quite frank, probably everyone in this room these days. When we're thinking about what XM does, how is XM sort of strengthening America's supply chains and in turn our broader economic and national security?
Well, first of all, thank you so much. As she mentioned, Citi is definitely one of our longstanding bankers that XM Bank has worked with in the past. I really want to start out with, I know that most people, I tell people that Export-Import Bank of the United States is probably one of the best kept secrets in Washington, and probably one of the best kept secrets throughout the United States. Now I want to see folks raise their hand who know about Export-Import Bank. All right. Have you had any transactions with the Export-Import Bank? All right. See how them hands go down? So that's why I'm on this panel. It is about
spread the word.
it's about the business of inclusion and people understanding that this agency, which is 88 years old, that I have the privilege to lead because of President Biden's nomination, is one that should not be a secret, and it definitely should not be a secret about the fact that you should be raising your hands, that you have had the financing that is available, the over $135 billion authorization that XM Bank has since 2019, that's available for transactions for exporting. People in this room, I would love to see the next time I come here, more hands being raised. We hope that can happen through the work that we're getting ready to do and what we are doing on the supply chain. But let me just take a point of order. I have so excited to be here, Liz. I got to know Liz when I was at the German Marshall Fund in this organization, USGLC. And what she mentioned about going around the country is exactly the kinds of partnerships that we want to have, not only with USGLC, but with all of you as we host and co-host events to talk about what America's agencies, federal agencies, have to offer for our American businesses out there who want to do business overseas. I'm excited to be here with Mayor Benjamin because just a couple of weeks ago, we were with the leadership of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which he had the fortunate opportunity to lead. And that because of, not just because of the work that I did at state, but also because we understand, I totally understand that state and local leaders are the drivers of their economies. And so we have a new partnership relationship, not just with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, but also with our National Governors Association, with our National Association of Counties, and our National League of Cities. We look at those institutions as being very important in the work that we're getting ready to do on the supply chain. And then it's remarkable to be here with all of you because you were members and organizations who really helped in the survivability and the bringing XM Bank back to life. So I really applaud and thank you very much because when we went through the battle when they went through the battle in 2019, it allows me to be here, able to be here today. To make the survivability around the priorities of our prime mission about supporting our American exporters so that they can compete around the world and so that they can win the deals because I believe, and I know all of you do, that we have the best products and we have the best services, and I'm like 100% USA all day. Secondly, before we get to where we are on the supply chain, I think it's important to outline the fact that we are very fortunate to be in an administration with President Biden and Vice President Harris that 100% the Export-Import Bank. And the manifestation of that comes out in the work that we do with them every day. When we see that the president himself announces some of the work that we're doing and some of the transactions that we have made available, because at the end of the day, we're not just about facilitating transactions for businesses, but we're also supporting those businesses as they are creating jobs here in the United States. And I'm talking good paying labor union jobs in the United States. We are seeing a support of being a part of the president's economic team. When you see Director Sullivan and Director Deese come out and make a public statement, a press statement about the work that we're doing to shore up the supply chain in the initiative called Make More in America. We all know that we need to make more in America, but we also know we need to export more from America. And so this new program that is totally supported by the administration and has been lifted up by them came out in April, and it allows us to have more financing flexibilities that we can use, whether it is around content, whether it is around local cost, whether it's around loan tenors, and it's around the types of products or services that are coming before us, especially in the areas of environmentally beneficial, renewables, renewable energy, and energy efficiency storage. And then finally, because of our China and Transformational Export Program, which we call CTAP, you know we wouldn't be a government agency if we didn't have an initial. And that also comes with its own flexibilities. The Make More in America program is a direct outgrowth of when the president came in and on day one ordered all government agencies to do a review of what could, and he asked, what could we do to help support and shore up and reshore opportunities here in America. This is the first, MMIA is the first domestic manufacturing program that XM Bank has ever supported. It doesn't require us to do anything other than make our transactions available for more around small business, around environmentally beneficial, and also looking at those domestic manufacturers who want to export more from the United States, but also, and so everything, we want to make it in America, but we want to also make sure that that particular manufacturing, the initiative we have allows us to have an export nexus. So if we want our American companies to compete and we want them to win, especially in the facing the competition with China, and I tell people all the time, it's not just China, we got to look at the whole ball game. Everybody wants to work with Americans. And so when we were out of the business for a while, folks were coming in, and I want them back. I want you back. It's like Michael Jackson, he said, I want you back. And the only way we're going to be able to get you back is that Ex-Im Bank has to be more accountable. We also has to be more transparent, and we have to modernize what it is that we do, and that the financing that we have made available, that Congress has authorized us in our 2019, we've got to be an institution that work with our sister agencies like USTDA, MCC, DFC, Department of Commerce, all those C's that you all know about. But the reason why I point them out is because President Biden has asked all of us to be one government, that we might compete, but we don't have to be competitors. And that's why we are working very closely in a whole of government approach, especially as it relates to the supply chain.
Well, that is fantastic to hear, and I think, you know, when you're talking about the whole of government approach and the sister agencies, I sort of see a continuum of each of your agencies here, and certainly, you know, thinking about where this could really be applicable, there's nowhere that, you know, is top of mind these days other than the continent of Africa. And so, you know, President Atkins, you know, the White House announced the U.S. Africa Leader Summit, December 13th to 15th. Be there, be square. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No. But my real question here, though, is that when we think about this continuum of the USTDA, of Ex-Im, and USADF, and your, you know, impacts at a very direct level across the continent, can you give us a little flavor of what some of the sectors that USADF focuses on that perhaps might be, you know, raised at the summit as well, and what type of strategic investments and partnerships you take with public, private, and NGO actors throughout the continent?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm going to start by saying that I appreciate and associate myself with all of the comments of my sisters, and we will have a 50-yard dash in front of the hotel at the end of the panel to decide who, in fact, is the best kept secret in the U.S. government. The second thing that I would say, I wouldn't be a good son of my mother's or a good Southerner if I didn't thank USGLC, if I didn't thank Chairman Meeks, Chairwoman Lee for all of their sacrifices. I'm very happy to be a son of the CBC myself, and for the CBC itself to be a collection of the sons and daughters of a community of people who have fought for a very long time to make America as good as it's promised. And so I just want to honor them, and again to honor Liz, because many people have made promises in America over the last few years since the murder of George Floyd. Many have been called out for not staying true to the commitments that they made at that time when it became popular to make those kinds of proclamations. And so I want to honor you all for staying true to that, for raising the flag on these issues that are so important to all of us. The thing I want to say that begins to respond to the question is to focus really on the beauty of small things. You know, so when people talk about USADF, small, USTDA, small, Ex-Im, small, unknown, right? And one of the things I've been saying over the last few months is that anyone who has been impacted by COVID or loves flowers or has small children will know that small things can take your life, but small things can also make your life. And so in America, us to move away from the notion that there is a direct correlation between size and significance. And when we begin to think about the African Leaders Summit, the U.S. African Leaders Summit, I think the first thing that comes to my mind is the change in the tone of the United States towards the continent of Africa. That we can recognize global competition. We can recognize the role that Russia and China is playing in the world, but that we can still focus on Africa on its own terms for the ways in which our nation has mutual interest and can have mutually supportive relationships and benefits with the nations of Africa, which then leads to this idea of partnership, taking us out of a long history in which we have in some way supposed that we are a nation that has fallen from the heavens and that the rest of the world is just lucky that we're here to serve as an example for them, moving to a place where America is a nation just like others, trying to climb up out of a valley to make equality a reality, to make democracy a reality, to make human dignity for everyone a reality. And that is where we meet in this moment under the Biden administration ahead of the summit. I think that obviously in a time in the world where pandemic and economic crisis and climate crises collide, one of the things we have is an opportunity, just like we had in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, to see the failure of our systems, to see that the old world systems actually do not suffice in the current moment, and to think about how we can remake them without blaming one another, without fighting with one another, but realizing that if you actually care about the end result, which is the standard of living for the people whom we seek to serve in America and in Africa, that we have to reset these relationships. And so when you think about economic growth and recovery on the continent, obviously in the context of the post-COVID moment, our unit of measure at USADF really is the everyday people of Africa. It is communities, right? We do not have an agency with a budget big enough where our supposition is that we can move the needle of a nation, right? So our unit of measure is the individual. Our unit of measure are local communities. And the realization that regardless of COVID or climate or conflict or coup, people have to be able to think about tomorrow and plan for a future and feed and protect their children, right? And so this is agriculture, which leads into what I would suggest food self-sufficiency, right? Moving beyond the notion even of food security. Obviously, in that realm, you have things that go towards climate resilience. Then renewable energy for USADF, trying to expand power and electrification out of the major cities into para-urban areas, into IDP encampments, into refugee camps, into the rural areas of the continent, also supporting the notion of a just energy transition in a world where Africa is being asked to do more than others have done when they have contributed the least to the deleterious impacts of climate change that we are now all facing. The third for us is a focus on employability, is a focus on job creation, is a focus on women and youth. And one of the things I've said consistently since I've been on board is that in Washington, there is a way in which we want to focus on women, there's a way in which we want to focus on youth, which in some ways makes the rhetoric sound as if they are these small, niche, special interest groups, right? When in fact, they are marginalized majorities. And if you're not in the game of marginalized majorities, then you're not in the game, because they are the future. And these are the folks who make the bedrock of these societies. And so that is where USADF looks to focus and is looking partnership across the U.S. interagency, across the American business community, and then certainly with our partners on the continent, whether they be at national, state, or local levels in any given country or region.
Well, I'm definitely hearing whole of government. I'm hearing partnership. I'm hearing the through line of talent. I'm wondering if we can sort of think through, and I'm going to ask a kind of a twofer, if I could, picking up on something you said around, food, not insecurity, but more about sustainability, it seems, and thinking about agriculture. Director Yvonne, Chair Lewis, are there things that, USTDA and XIM are doing in those exact spaces, perhaps that even include members of the African diaspora or, African Americans or people of color writ large in your work at both of your agencies around this very issue?
Absolutely, and I think that it's, when we talk about food security and agriculture, really important to think about the infrastructure that allows it to happen, right? So the ancillary infrastructure, whether it's clean energy, whether it's weather forecasting technology, whether it is transportation, to include cold storage, all the things and all the structure, the ecosystem, if you will, that will allow farmers and rural citizens and even young people. I was on another CBC panel yesterday focusing on agriculture and hearing from the ambassador of Rwanda to the United States about all the work that they're doing to get young people, actually through technology, engaged and involved and interested. She even told a story of someone leaving law school to go into agriculture. Sorry, I'm not picking on the law, but it is absolutely key to get all of these constituencies engaged. And we have to think holistically in terms of facilitating the infrastructure to allow that to happen. We have to think creatively too. And I'll just give two examples. And I'll give the first because it is an example of a continuum from ADF, where ADF, through its challenge, awarded to Sose Energy, Habiba Ali, the ability to, using solar technology in the northern states of Nigeria to begin to bring power to rural communities. USTDA was then able to pick up and provide a grant that would allow her to increase by so many, reaching over 200,000 people in northern Nigeria. So again, allowing the rural communities to leverage their work in agricultural sector. The other points a little bit to creativity. So some of you might know that pyrethrum, which is a flower, you mentioned flowers, that is has it's sort of a chrysanthemum, but it's an important natural source of fertilizer. And Kenya is a huge producer of this flower, and they want to be able to build facilities to process it. USTDA is working to facilitate that kind of work, which will mean healthier, but also healthier communities, but also grow the ability to actually fertilize and grow their produce in a way that's safe, and then they can distribute. Important to look at port projects and how they can get from their countries to countries around and exporting. So I think that those are examples of how we can make sure that the agri sector is grown. We have to look at the infrastructure. I just want to stress that partnership is key and that our partners in sub-Saharan Africa want to partner with us. I think that there is a sense of transparency, a sense of we're in this to promote sustainability. So we have a leg up, if you'll see what I mean, but we just have to leverage it and take advantage of it. And we should use everything in our arsenal, and I'll just close with the diaspora community, because the diaspora community provides a sort of unique route to building international relationships. There is an understanding, there is technical expertise, and we are very rich in this resource, and we should be mindful to leverage it in all of the work that we do. And USTDA is being very intentional of bringing the diaspora community into the opportunities that we help to create.
Thank you for that. Chair Lewis, anything that you'd like to briefly add?
One, I would definitely like to echo what the President has said regarding partnerships. It is not just about us as government agencies working more collaboratively together. It is really about working with all of you. The private sector is critical. The private sector is central to the work that we do at Ex-Im Bank. And it's even more critical when we're working in markets, whether it's in the Western Hemisphere or when it's in sub-Saharan Africa. In the last 20 years, Ex-Im Bank has done over $20 billion on the continent, and we currently right now have about $2 billion in our pipeline. The way XM's charter is set forth is that we cannot discriminate against any size or any sector or any region. And so we really are working very hard with the White House team that is going to produce the Africa Summit leaders, the Summit of African Leaders, is to see how can we provide more continued transaction available, which is actually called out in our 2019 reauthorization. I will tell you that my first visitor, international visitor, was the Prime Minister of Cote d'Ivoire. And one of the things that I made very clear is that as this new era that we're entering into, this new chapter at EXIM Bank, that we're going to be much more open, much more welcoming, and we need to do much more. Just as late as last week when Director Bong and I were in Pittsburgh, as well as when I was at the UN, we were meeting with sovereign banks, we were meeting with leaders from sovereign countries, and we were meeting with CEOs who are doing business on the continent. We were making it very clear about some of what our priorities are. And going to your point, women, totally a priority for us, and that comes under our small business mandate. But it is not just small business or small business stakes, but we're talking women, we're talking minorities, we're talking rural communities, LGBTQ. We're talking the entire picture and the spectrum of small business. We know we have to do more. And we have been very aggressive about the percentage of 30% that the Congress has asked us to do in terms of financing availables from the 2019 authorization. Congress also asked us to do more on the renewable and energy efficiency, energy storage side. I can tell you that when we were in New York, and of course when we were in Pittsburgh, it was all renewables, renewables, renewables. And on the continent, that is definitely one of the mandates that the other EXIM banks from the continent, as well as EXIM banks, export-import banks around the world, are coming forth to us about. So we're looking at how can we create more memorandums of understanding so that we can look at how we can do co-financing together, because it is about not just about us going alone. It's too much work to do. We're looking at how we also can partner, not just with the private sector, but also with other export credit agencies, because all of us want to share and spread the risk. And that seems to be a theme that is going on. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to an export credit agency from Europe or whether you're talking to an export credit agency in the Middle East or from Africa. As it relates to our pipeline, what I am out is doing all the time is saying that this agency is not well known outside, I would say, out of the export community, but we need to do as many, as they say, export 101s as we possibly can. During COVID, EXIM Bank did over 600 webinars. We know that's not the only way. We have to be out in the streets every single day, and that's why we have increased the amount that we have placed on attention we have placed on small business. We've increased in terms of stepping up our participation with our regional teams so that we can be out and about in the communities. That's why I have asked all of our directors who are moving about in the country, north, south, east, and west, to be out there and participating with all of you. And we welcome opportunities to participate with your organization and any organizations that are here for you to take directly to your memberships and to your leaderships what EXIM Bank is doing. As to the diaspora community, one of the things that we also have at Export-Import Bank is that we have two mandated advisory committees. One is an overall advisory committee, which is actually meeting today, and I'm going to have to run out of here because I'm the chair of it, and it's happening soon. But it is chaired by Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Jude Kearney is the other chair of our Africa Advisory Committee. Today we are inducting our new team, and then we have asked all the chairs of whether it's our climate, our committee, our China committee, and then for the very first time, EXIM Bank is instituting a Advancing Women in Business as well as a Small Business Committee. When I go back and look at the work that we're doing on Africa, the diaspora community is exceptionally important to us, and that's why we have now, for the very first time, created an internal working team, which now comprises over 15 people. I'm very happy to say. First time I made a call out and said, who want to help us in this work? And people volunteered to participate. Everyone from our risk team, our lawyers, our bankers, you name it, our policy folks. Why was that so important? We had to show even internally that we have the talent, we have the skills, but we also have the interest for those that will be doing that with us. And so we have been working and participating in diaspora events, and for all the reasons that they cited as to why the diaspora community is so important. And we're really moving forward, hopefully beginning today with new leadership on our advisory teams to assist us in not just advice and counsel, and as I said, great policy, but it's all about the application for the Ex-Im Bank. It's all about the transaction. And we are seeking more. We cannot we cannot sit back and wait for it to come in the door. That's the old way. We have to be out here. If we want to be helpful about providing more financing around infrastructure, around renewables, around all of the areas for the president's PGII, digital connectivity, food, gender, we've got to be out there in the communities, and we need you. I'm asking you to become ambassadors for us at Ex-Im Bank to help us not only spread the word, but help us to bring those deals in the door so that we can do that rigorous due diligence that we need to. We can make sure that we are able to put more people back to work here in the United States and make sure that our American businesses are competitive.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to give one last question to President Atkins here. And thinking about the comments that we heard earlier today from Representative Meeks and thinking about what Director Ebong said about a through line, I was wondering if you could share with us a little bit about how USADF sees this, how it relates to your business in Africa, and what you're doing to sort of ensure that there is a broad opportunity from folks across communities to participate in that great work that you're doing.
Sure. Thank you for that. I think that for us, it points to one of the things that Chairman Meeks was saying about what you can find in small places that you may have overlooked. And so if I can brag on USADF for just a moment, 70% of our staff are African descended or from members of marginalized groups. About 63% of our staff are women. And so we figured some things out about how to open up the way for these folks. Not a charity program. Their understanding of culture, the languages that they know, their understanding of region and content is all part of what makes them brilliant contributors to the work that we do. The other part of it is for us to step back as a nation and to realize the common sense approach that what is happening outside your door has an impact of what's going to be happening inside your house. Moving away from the fallacy that there's a such thing as a domestic policy or a foreign policy that are distinct and separate from one another. Understanding that you only are as good abroad as people see you being at home. And this is something that is core to me, coming from a community that never had the luxury of fighting only on one front, right? The double victory from World War I, folks saying, hey, we're going to fight outside of our country, but we have to come back and we have to fight inside our countries as well, and making that recognition. The other piece is the work we've been doing, and many of you have, with the USGLC, which I take as part of my mandate to go all over this nation to tell the story of why this work is important, to tell the story of what Africa means to America, right? Mm-hmm. My supposition is that there are few nations on earth who have received more from Africa than America. And my ancestors were part of who and those that gave all of that to make this nation as great as it is, and to make that story one that is not controversial, to make that story one that is the good old common sense that it is. And I think that that will begin to take us in the kind of direction that we want to go as a nation and as a people.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think there's no better way than to end on that great note, and certainly we do appreciate the great work by Liz and the entire USGLC team in raising some of these issues and providing this opportunity to hear from all of you all about the great work that your agencies are doing. Thank you guys so much. Let's give a round of applause to our panelists.
And a round of applause for Jahan as well. Very best, Oprah. No, President Atkins, Director Ebong, Chair Lewis, thank you so much. Jahan, a fantastic job. Again, I want to double down. The USGLC team, staff, superb. I mean, we're well over, and look at this room still, guys. It's because of the quality of these presentations. Thank you to Chevron for your amazing support of this effort as well. Thank you, and God bless you.